Where is Sarah Ferguson now, do you know? Because I've read reports that she's in the United Arab Emirates and broke. I've also read reports that she spent a month at a luxury Swiss resort that cost $25,000 a day. And it's a resort that she has promoted before. Here she is.
The year is 2026. Somewhere along the wild, windswept Atlantic coast of County Donegal, Ireland, a woman checks in under the radar at a modest seaside wellness lodge. No entourage, no royal protection, no cameras, or so she hoped. The paparazzi found her anyway, and what they discovered is going to absolutely floor you. Not long ago, this woman was a fixture at Buckingham Palace. She wore titles like armour, moved in the highest circles of global power, and commanded fees that most people could only dream of. She was photographed at galas, celebrated in magazines, and counted the ultra-wealthy among her personal contacts. She sat at tables where the rest of the world
never give up and never to believe they can't achieve their dreams.
Could only watch through a window. Today, she is registered at a budget Irish lodge for roughly £100 per night. A 99% status plummet from the £16,000 a day Swiss sanctuary she was spotted leaving just weeks before. That woman is Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, former wife of a prince, former global brand ambassador, former charity chairwoman, former author, former everything. And her fall from grace has just entered its most devastating chapter. Stay with us, because by the time you reach the end of this video, you will understand exactly why Sarah Ferguson's world didn't just crack. It completely shattered. And more importantly, you will understand why this time, unlike every other time before, there may be no coming back. Make sure you are subscribed and have the notifications bell turned on, because this is the kind of story that tends to disappear. Tracking the Duchess, from Zurich to Donegal. Let's go back to the beginning of this extraordinary unraveling. For years, Sarah Ferguson managed to maintain a peculiar kind of survival. Despite the scandals, despite the debt headlines, despite the public humiliations that came in waves, she always landed somewhere soft. A sponsored retreat here, a free luxury stay there, a speaking engagement that quietly settled outstanding accounts. She had a talent, almost a superpower, for finding a safety net just before she hit the ground. That is what made the first tip-offs so fascinating. Investigators and journalists tracking her movements in early 2026 believed she had retreated to Zurich, to one of the most exclusive wellness resorts on the planet. The kind of place where the ultra-wealthy go to disappear, where gold-infused treatments, private wings, and total media blackouts are part of the daily package. At £16,000 per day, it is not a place you stumble into by accident. But here is the thing that was not adding up. By early 2026, Sarah Ferguson's income had not merely declined. According to multiple sources and company filings, it had ceased entirely.
And how right she was. And today we talk about Lisa Marie. We look at Priscilla.
So how was a woman facing complete financial ruin managing to access one of the most expensive resorts in Europe? Who was paying? And why? Before we go further, drop a comment below right now. Do you think she paid for that Swiss retreat herself? Or do you think someone else footed the bill? Because what comes next strongly suggests the latter. The answer, it seems, is that she did not stay long. As media coverage intensified and fresh legal proceedings gathered momentum in American courts, the Zurich option became untenable. The financial fortress she had briefly sheltered in began to crumble around her. And so the Duchess pivoted, not to another palace, not to a friend's villa in Monaco, not to an exclusive members club in Mayfair. She pivoted to Donegal. Valley Life Lodge sits on Ireland's rugged northwestern coastline. It is, by any standard, a perfectly pleasant budget retreat, the kind of place couples visit for coastal walks and quiet weekends, the kind of place where £100 a night gets you a standard room, a sea view if you are lucky, and most importantly, anonymity. But for Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York, former wife of a prince, former global brand ambassador, former author, former charity chair, it was a staggering descent. Local residents were reportedly stunned. A former palace inhabitant registering at a seaside lodge like an ordinary tourist. No security detail, no recognizable staff, Just a woman trying desperately to vanish from view. She almost succeeded. The financial collapse. 6 companies dissolved in 1 week. Now let's talk money. Because the full picture of Sarah Ferguson's financial freefall is more dramatic than any tabloid headline has managed to capture. In a single week in February 2026, 6 companies directly linked to Sarah Ferguson were officially dissolved or marked for registry elimination. 6 in 1 week. Read that list slowly, because each one of these represents a chapter in her long, exhausting effort to monetize her royal connections. Phoenix Events, her events and appearances company, gone. Fergie's Farm, her lifestyle brand venture, gone. Luna Investments, a financial vehicle, gone. Solomon Limited, a production-linked entity, gone. Philanthropy Limited, a charitable vehicle, gone. Planet Partners Productions, her media production arm, gone. These were not just business names. They were her income architecture. Every speaking fee, every brand partnership, every book deal, every appearance, all of it was channeled through one or more of these entities. And they are now extinct. But that is not even the most damaging part. The most damaging part came when her charity went dark. Sarah's Trust, her prominently launched charitable organization for disadvantaged women and children, announced what was described as an indefinite closure at almost exactly the same moment that explosive emails began circulating publicly. Emails that painted a very different picture of the compassionate philanthropist she had spent years performing for the cameras. Here is what I want you to think about. Is there a difference between someone who does good works for genuine reasons and someone who builds a charitable identity specifically to protect a commercial brand? Because the answer to that question is at the heart of everything that follows. The collapse of the charity was not just a reputational blow, it was a structural one.
I'm the generational bridge because I'm still very young, in case you hadn't realized. Yeah, exactly.
Sarah Ferguson had long used her charitable activities as the central stage from which every other commercial venture drew its legitimacy. Without that platform, corporate sponsors, who had tolerated scandal after scandal over the years, finally reached their limit. They did not distance themselves. They fled. And so, in the space of weeks, a woman who had built and rebuilt again her public brand found herself without a single functioning commercial infrastructure. No companies, no charity, no sponsors, no stage, official income vanished entirely. The Epstein connection, what the emails actually reveal. Now we need to address the story that sits at the core of everything you have just heard, because the financial collapse did not happen in a vacuum. It happened because of what those emails said. Sarah Ferguson's connection to Jeffrey Epstein has been reported on for years, but the 2026 disclosures went further than anything previously made public, and they arrived at the worst possible time, when courts in the United States were actively seeking testimony, and when her ex-husband Prince Andrew was himself facing escalating legal pressure. The emails, according to multiple reports, paint a portrait not merely of friendship or professional association, but of profound financial dependency. One email reportedly shows Epstein claiming he had supported Sarah Ferguson financially for 15 years. 15 years. Another set of exchanges, described as genuinely shocking by those who reviewed them, allegedly shows Sarah helping to facilitate introductions between Epstein and women in her own circle, not acquaintances, her own goddaughter, her own daughters. I want you to stop for a moment and let that sink in. Not strangers, not distant contacts, people she was personally responsible for protecting. But perhaps the most explosive revelation, the one that appears to have finally broken the last remaining pillars of her commercial reputation, involves a private assurance she allegedly gave directly to the financier himself. According to 2026 disclosures, emails suggest that Sarah Ferguson privately told Epstein she would not personally label him a predator, that her public distancing from him was, in her own words, purely performative, done only to protect her marketability. Her public outrage, theater, her private allegiance, steadfast. If that is accurate, and courts and investigators are still working through the evidence, it represents one of the most calculated acts of reputational management imaginable. It means that for years, while victims were speaking out, And while the world was slowly learning the truth about Epstein's crimes, the Duchess of York was allegedly more concerned with whether her brand could weather the storm than with the welfare of those who had suffered. Legal experts and commentators have been vocal on multiple fronts. Sarah Ferguson has been identified as a material witness to events that took place in Epstein's properties. She was described as a regular visitor. There are active calls for her to testify before the United States Senate. Additionally, financial investigators in the United Kingdom have been urged to examine her tax affairs and the operation of her charitable organizations under the relevant Companies and Charities Acts. The legal exposure is not theoretical. It is live, active, and rapidly deepening. Andrew's shadow: how her ex-husband's crisis accelerated her downfall. You cannot fully understand Sarah Ferguson's position in 2026 without understanding what is simultaneously happening to her ex-husband, Prince Andrew. While global attention fixed itself on Andrew's February detention, a jaw-dropping development that saw a senior member of the British royal family facing his own legal reckoning on his 66th birthday, Sarah was making her quiet disappearance to the Irish coast. The timing was not coincidental. Every new headline about Andrew dragged Sarah's name back into the light. Every fresh document release, every new court filing, every witness statement, they all connected back in some way to the world the two of them had shared, the world they had built, and the compromises they had both allegedly made to sustain it. Here is a question that has been generating enormous debate online. Do you think Sarah Ferguson knew the full extent of what she was involved in, or was she herself a victim of manipulation? Let us know in the comments. The answers are genuinely divided, and there is no easy answer here. What is certain is that the royal safety net, the institutional protection that senior royals and their families have historically relied upon, has been withdrawn. King Charles III, navigating an extraordinarily difficult period for the monarchy, has made no secret of his intention to prioritize institutional survival over individual family loyalty. For Sarah, that withdrawal of protection has been decisive. Without the implicit backing of the royal family, she is simply a private citizen with a very expensive history and a very rapidly shrinking social circle. The people who once took her calls are not taking them now. The doors that once opened are firmly shut, and the Middle East, specifically the United Arab Emirates, has apparently become one of the only remaining places where her name still carries some residual currency among certain circles. Reports in early 2026 describe her attempting to leverage whatever remaining connections she has in Gulf states to generate income. It is, by any measure, a last resort. What the paparazzi actually found. So let's return to that modest lodge on the Irish coast, because the details of what paparazzi discovered when they tracked Sarah Ferguson to County Donegal tell a story that goes far beyond the simple contrast of budget accommodation versus luxury resort. She was not, by all accounts, there to be seen. There were no strategically placed photo opportunities, no book to promote, no brand to amplify, no charitable mission to communicate. She was walking on beaches in low-key clothing, sitting in corners of the dining room with her back to other guests, and avoiding any interactions that might draw attention. For a woman who spent decades managing her image with extraordinary, some would say obsessive, precision, this retreat represented something qualitatively different from all previous escapes. This was not a strategic pause. This was not a recalibration. This was a woman trying to disappear. The 4-star classification of Valley Life Lodge is, in context, almost ironic. In the world Sarah Ferguson once inhabited, 4 stars barely registered. She occupied suites.
Street Child is so good is that children in crisis were in the field in Sierra Leone, saw Tom's work.
She attended resorts that did not bother with star classifications because their clientele were beyond needing that kind of reassurance. Today, a 4-star room on the Irish coast at £100 a night is her reality. And here is the detail that has struck many observers most forcefully. She has apparently embraced it. Not with dignity exactly, but with a kind of weary necessity. This is where she can afford to be. This is where nobody, for a few days at least, will look. There is something almost Shakespearean about this. The woman who defended the indefensible to protect her brand, now hiding in plain sight at a seaside lodge because the brand itself no longer exists. But the hiding could not last forever. The paparazzi found her, the courts are finding her, and the legal machinery grinding away on 2 continents continues to find her, in documents, in emails, in testimony that she cannot outrun by simply changing her postcode. The brand that evaporated, a timeline of commercial destruction. To appreciate just how total this collapse has been, it helps to trace the trajectory. Because Sarah Ferguson's fall did not happen overnight, it happened in stages, each one more damaging than the last. For decades, she operated a peculiar kind of high-wire act. Her name was tainted, but still bankable. Her associations were questionable, but her personal warmth, her trademark exuberance and apparent openness, kept her commercially viable in certain markets. She wrote books. She did Weight Watchers. She appeared on American television. She launched charitable ventures that kept her in respectable company. Even after the infamous 2010 News of the World sting, in which she was filmed appearing to offer access to Prince Andrew for cash, she survived. The outrage was intense. The humiliation was total, but she survived. Even as the Epstein associations became impossible to ignore, she survived. She issued statements. She performed public contrition. She told interviewers she deeply regretted her association with Epstein, that she had been naive, that she had not known. That survival instinct, relentless, exhausting, almost admirable in its tenacity, finally met its match in 2026. Because survival requires the cooperation of others. It requires someone to publish your book.
It was just an invisible hand. You always felt it. And it was,
Someone to invite you to their conference. Someone to put you in their campaign. Someone to accept your call. And when the emails became public, every remaining someone looked the other way. The 6 company dissolutions in February 2026 were not the cause of her downfall. They were its clearest symptom. Each dissolved company represented a vehicle that had outlived its usefulness, a brand extension that could no longer find buyers, a venture that had run out of road. The charity closure was worse, because charities carry moral weight that commercial companies do not. You can close a production company without anyone asking hard questions. When you close a charity for disadvantaged women and children in the same week that emails circulate showing your private correspondence with a convicted sex trafficker, the questions write themselves. This is the point in the story where I want to hear from you. Some people watching this will feel a degree of sympathy. They will see a flawed human being being publicly destroyed. Others will feel that this is simply accountability arriving, very late, at the right address. Which camp are you in? Tell us in the comments below. The legal exposure. What comes next? Let's be direct about where things stand legally, because this is not merely a reputational story. It has significant legal dimensions that are still actively unfolding. In the United States, Sarah Ferguson has been identified by commentators and legal analysts as a material witness in proceedings related to Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operations. She was not a peripheral figure. She was a regular visitor to Epstein's properties. She was in communication with him over a period of years during which, investigators allege, she was fully aware of his activities. There are active calls for her to testify before the United States Senate. Those calls have grown louder, as document releases have made her communications harder to contextualize as innocent.
The thing is that I lost
together is what I'm saying.
Together, yes, we 100% live together.
In the United Kingdom, financial regulators and tax authorities have been urged to examine her affairs. Specifically, her tax compliance over a period when she was allegedly receiving financial support from Epstein, support that, if undeclared, would represent serious breaches of UK tax law. Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs has not publicly confirmed an investigation, but legal analysts have noted that the publicly available evidence creates questions that are very difficult to ignore. Her charitable operations are also under scrutiny. Multiple commentators have suggested that her charitable vehicles may have been run in ways that breach the Charities Act. Put simply, the legal jeopardy on multiple fronts is real, active, and not going away because she has retreated to a quiet lodge in Donegal. The mist may feel protective from the inside. From the outside, it is a very thin disguise. The human dimension, Fergie's choices and their consequences. There is a version of this story that invites straightforward moral condemnation, and a great deal of that condemnation is arguably warranted. But there is also a more complicated version, one that asks how a woman of genuine intelligence, with daughters she clearly loves, and a life that was in many respects genuinely difficult, ended up so thoroughly entangled with one of history's most notorious criminals. The financial dependency that runs through all of this is striking. Sarah Ferguson has spent most of her adult life in serious financial difficulty. Divorced from a prince in an institution that offered very limited financial support, she was essentially thrown into the commercial world with nothing but a title and a personality. She had to monetize both, constantly, under relentless public scrutiny. That context does not excuse the choices she allegedly made, facilitating introductions between a predator and vulnerable young women, including women she was personally responsible for, is not something that financial desperation can justify. But it does help explain the dependency, and it helps explain why, for 15 years, she allegedly accepted Epstein's financial support while telling herself and others that he was misunderstood or persecuted or heroic, as she is reported to have described him to at least one person. There is a deeply uncomfortable question running through all of this. At what point does willful blindness become complicity? When do we stop calling someone naive and start calling them accountable? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the questions that courts and investigators will eventually have to answer. For the women and girls who were harmed by Epstein and his network, the details of Sarah Ferguson's private communications, her alleged private assurances to him, her alleged role in facilitating access, are not abstract moral questions. They are deeply personal. And that, perhaps more than the financial collapse, and the company dissolutions, and the paparazzi photographs in Donegal, is what will define the final chapter of Sarah Ferguson's public story. The Middle East card, her last remaining refuge. There is one final dimension to this story that deserves attention, and it speaks to how dramatically Sarah Ferguson's world has contracted. The United Arab Emirates and the broader Gulf region have, according to multiple sources, become one of the only places where Sarah Ferguson's name still carries any meaningful social currency. In certain circles in the Gulf, British titles, even contested ones, even ones attached to scandal, retain an almost talismanic appeal. The glamour of the British aristocracy travels well in those corridors, even when the reputation has curdled elsewhere. Reports from early 2026 describe the Duchess making overtures in the region, attempting to convert her residual social capital into financial support of some kind. Whether that takes the form of speaking engagements, brand consultancy, hospitality partnerships, or straightforward appeals to wealthy individuals for assistance, is unclear. What is clear is that the avenues available to her have narrowed dramatically. The English-speaking markets that once formed the core of her commercial activity, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, are for the foreseeable future effectively closed. Her brand is not merely damaged in those markets, it is toxic. The Middle East represents something she has very little of left, a place where her past has not yet fully arrived. But information travels, and the internet does not respect geography. The question of whether the Gulf Gambit can generate enough financial stability to help her weather the ongoing legal and reputational storm is one that remains unanswered. Those who know her well suggest she is characteristically determined, that her famous survival instinct has not been entirely extinguished by the events of 2026. Others are less optimistic. The final reckoning, what Donegal really means. So let's return, one final time, to that wind-battered coastline in County Donegal, to the modest lodge, to the standard room, to the woman walking on a grey beach, trying to look like nobody. Valley Life Lodge is, as it happens, a perfectly decent place to spend a few days. The Donegal coast is genuinely beautiful, wild and empty in a way that the places Sarah Ferguson usually frequented never were. There is something to be said for simplicity, for clean air, for the absence of performance. But for Sarah Ferguson, the lodge is not a lifestyle choice. It is not a deliberate retreat into simplicity or a publicity-savvy display of humility. It is where she can afford to be. And the gap between where she can afford to be and where she used to be between a £16,000-a-day Swiss sanctuary and a £100-a-night Irish lodge is not merely a financial measurement. It is the distance between a life of consequence and its absence, between a world that needed her and a world that has quietly, comprehensively moved on. The most honest thing you can say about this story is this: Sarah Ferguson is reaping the consequences of decades of choices. Some of those choices were made out of desperation, some out of ambition, some, allegedly, out of a cold-eyed calculation about what her brand could and could not survive. The one she could not survive was this: the truth. When those emails became public, when the private Sarah and the public Sarah were placed side by side, there was nowhere left to hide. Not in Zurich, not in Mayfair, not even in the Atlantic mists of Donegal. The paparazzi found her, the courts are finding her, and history, it seems, has already made up its mind. That is the full story of Sarah Ferguson's extraordinary ongoing collapse, from a £16,000-a-day Swiss resort to the windswept shores of Donegal, to a legal and financial position that most observers describe as genuinely dire. Now, I want to know what you think. Is Sarah Ferguson a victim of circumstances and financial manipulation, or a willing participant who has simply been exposed? Do you think she will face formal legal consequences in the UK, the US, or both? And perhaps most interestingly, do you think there is any version of a comeback from here? Drop your answers in the comments. This community generates some of the most thoughtful debate on YouTube, and this topic deserves it. If this video gave you something to think about, share it. The full picture of what happened to Sarah Ferguson in 2026 is not being told anywhere near as completely as it should be. Help us change that. Subscribe for more in-depth coverage. Hit the bell, share the video, and we will see you in the next one.